For today's episode, I am joined by Gary Sheng, a New York City-based technologist and social entrepreneur. Gary is the Chief Operating Officer of Civics Unplugged, an NYC-based social enterprise he co-founded that empowers leaders of Gen Z with the training, funding, and network they need to become civic innovators that build a brighter future for humanity. He was recently honored by Forbes 30 Under 30. Before co-founding Civics Unplugged, Gary served as a software engineering team lead at Google on Google Cloud, as well as co-director of Dancing Pineapple, a popular electronic music blog and live events company that was followed by over 100K music lovers. Recently, Civics Unplugged launched their Dream DAO. We'll dive deep into that later on in the episode. Thanks for being here.
It's an honor to be here.
I would love for you to walk us through your journey, starting out with your unique story on how you were born.
Oh, wow. So how was I born? Well, I like to say that I wouldn't be born without America. I wouldn't be born without a political party that a lot of people don't like today, and that's the Republican Party. And so let me explain why. You're probably wondering. So my parents, they basically tested out of just going to grad school in China. So my dad was able to go to grad school for his, I believe, his master's at Louisiana State University. And while he was there, he had my older brother in 1989, March of 1989. And then a few months later, in June of 1989, do you know what happened?
I'm not sure.
The Tiananmen Square massacre happened, which is when tens of thousands of people your age were slaughtered for protesting for freedom and democracy in China.
Wow.
And
that's horrible.
Yeah, so how does that relate to, what does this have to do with my existence? I wouldn't be born if it weren't for the fact that a former Texas governor who happened to be the president at the time, George H.W. Bush, gave my family political asylum. So they didn't have to go back to China after finishing their graduate program. Why that's significant is because of, have you heard of the one-child policy?
They're only allowed to have one child.
Yeah. So that's changed in the last decade. But when I was born, that was very much a thing. They wanted to curb the population growth. And so I literally wouldn't be born if it were not for a former Texas governor and a Republican president at the time. And more broadly, I wouldn't have been born if America did not take in essentially refugees from an authoritarian country. And so I promise you, unfortunately, that's going to be a very relevant discussion that we're going to have this decade. Because it's going to be a fight between freedom and authoritarianism this decade. These centralized powers are going to keep ratcheting up their centralization. They're going to keep crushing freedom of speech. They're going to keep trampling on people's desire to organize on their own outside of government. And so what are we going to do about that? And that's something I think about a lot.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty deep story. I'm glad you are here today.
Yeah.
So let's jump in and talk a little bit more about your professional career. Looking back at Google, so that was your dream job, and you obtained what you thought you were going to, becoming a software lead. It ended up not being what it was expected, but I'm sure you still learned a lot in your time there. Can you tell a little bit about what you took away from that job and you integrated into Civics Unplugged?
I learned a lot. I mean, even though I was, leaving was one of the best decisions of my life, I learned a ton. I learned a lot about hard work. I learned a lot about how to manage large teams. The teams that I manage are not that large, but, some of my managers, they manage hundreds of people. And so how do they do that? A lot of it was just a lot of discipline and sticking to processes that have worked in the past and trying to improve those processes from just experimentation with better processes for managing and coordinating a large team. Of course, I learned a lot about technology and that curiosity about technology and desire to kind of weave together different tools to get things done that has never left me. And I code every so often, but not that much anymore. But that sort of spirit of being really thoughtful about figuring out what technology to leverage and how to leverage that technology to solve problems. That has never left me, and I'm really grateful for that.
Amazing. Yeah, in my internship at Walmart this past summer, I just started learning how to code. And
Nice.
It's amazing what your mind could do and create.
Oh, yeah. I mean, speaking to that, I had no idea about that, even though, I kind of was like a little bit rebellious against my parents when I was growing up. And they were both computer science people. They both were IT. And my dad was actually a computer science professor, but I was like, I'm not going to do that stuff. And I was lucky to have had mentors at Duke University, which is where I went to college, be like, hey, this is actually a big part of the future. You should probably check it out. And I was lucky to have my first internship in college was at this startup called Pocket in San Francisco. Shout out to Matt Colton for being my kind of mentor at that time. And there was like a 6 to 8 person team that had an app that was used by millions of people. And
Wow.
That's the power of technology. And so I've always been thinking in terms of big ideas and big scale, and trying to change the world for the better. And once I discovered software, I was like, okay, it's possible.
Right, for sure. Wow, a 6 to 8 person team in charge of that? That's crazy.
No, it's great. It's a big responsibility as well, and I know that's been a big topic in America about engineers having a little bit too much control over our lives, and I think that's a valid concern.
For sure, for sure. So I listened to your TED Talk, and there was a quote that stuck out to me. Just because the stock prices of companies like Google are soaring doesn't mean humanity is flourishing. Can you tell me more about that and what ultimately led you to leave Google?
I think the metrics that we track say a lot about who we are. I think the metrics that our society tracks and brags about, our presidents brag about, say a lot about our society. Do we brag about how flourishing our forests are and how clean our water is and infant mortality and how educated our kids are? It's important to notice what presidents don't talk about because they might be embarrassed about, or who knows what reasons. We talk a lot about GDP, and we talk a lot about earnings for a company, but what is the impact? What does it mean for a company to be a net positive on society, and not just net positive, like a supercharger of flourishing in society, of human and planetary flourishing? And so I think it's important to really ask these questions, and I happen to know a lot of people working on these questions, so I'm pretty close with the people leading this charge at Harvard and Oxford, the human flourishing labs at both places. And I think what is needed is, I tend to just point to young people as a really critical piece of any sort of change-making puzzle. It needs to be a demand from Gen Z that we rethink the way we think about everything, right? Again, the metrics, the key performance indicators, where we decide what a success is, that has everything to do with what we focus on and what we design products around and what we talk about. The fact that the NBA tracks how many assists someone has, isn't it funny? If they didn't track assists, people would be more ball hogs, right?
Right. Yeah,
because people want to increase their metrics as players, and the coaches want to be like, oh, my team has the most assists. And so what is the social change equivalent of assists? It's funny. This is actually the first time I've ever brought up this metaphor. And it's kind of maybe just because I'm comfortable in this conversation, but I think we can get pretty clever about what we reward, what we track in society. And I don't think it's going to be easy to convince most boomers to start tracking things. It's not that important, or no, we have other things to worry about. It's going to come from Gen Z. I really believe that.
For sure. Do you have any ideas of what those metrics will entail, or what our people can do to help?
Yeah, so I work with and I help build a few different communities and DAOs. And so the idea of what community health looks like let's say it's a digital community of 100 people. What does health look like? right? Is it just the number of people there? Obviously that's not just it, right? And so
Right.
so what is it? It's a combination of things, right? It's like, how often are people spontaneously hanging out? Like, how many messages are exchanged inside the chat platforms? How much gratitude is expressed on these chat platforms? How many like new ideas are sprouted because of what's happening in the community? How many people say, what percentage of people say that their lives are much better because of the community? So it's not, most people do not need to think about the level of thinking that I kind of spend a lot of time with, which is like global change. And I think everyone is part of communities, and I think everyone has the power to make them better by basically noticing what matters and trying to increase the metrics related to what matters, right? And you can even, if you want to start the smallest possible way, it's like, how many hours of sleep did I get? Did I get 8 hours of sleep? If you didn't get 8 hours of sleep, you should try to get 8 or 7 to 8 hours. Some people don't need 8 hours of sleep, but like most people do. And so if you are a normal person in that way, like I am, where I cannot function without 7 to 8 hours of sleep, start there. And then like you can start going wider, right? Like maybe you have a romantic partner or a friend. Like there's probably metrics that you can track that are relevant to making that relationship as fruitful as possible.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much. Another thing I noticed in your TED Talk was a powerful term you came up with called the UShaped Hole, defined as where your passions and your talents meet humanity's greatest needs. Can you tell us about the process you went through in finding your U-shaped hole, and do you have any advice for people struggling to find theirs?
Yeah, great question. So how did I find my U-shaped hole? I noticed, let's talk about it. I noticed what was really irritating me. And what was irritating me was bad leaders and systems that were making people feel unempowered. And I think it's important to just notice where your attention's going. Simultaneously, it's important to notice if your attention's being directed by algorithms and, that sort of thing. Where does your attention go when you're not just scrolling on social media? I think that's a good barometer. It's like what naturally comes up in conversation when people ask you what matters to you. I think that's a really good start. And then, but like, you pick a cause, right? You pick like, strengthening democracy. What does it mean, right? So you got to learn a lot about democracy. And are you trying to do electoral reform? Are you trying to make people understand each other better? Are you trying to be an elected official, right? Are you trying to be a civil servant? Or are you trying to just like encourage people to vote? So there's a lot of ways to strengthen democracy. So that's one thing. And then like, okay, what kind of niche within that cause do you want to focus on? And you don't have to be stuck to one cause, but it's helpful to be stuck to one cause just to even start like figuring out a lot of things about yourself. Because you can. You don't know what you're really good at until you try doing a bunch of stuff. You don't know what you're really passionate about until you notice if you have natural energy for that thing, right? And so, what's an example? Like I like country music, but I don't go out of my way to listen to it. Like I actually do. I'm not like making like I like country music. Like I'm happy to be in an environment where country music's being played, but I'm not going out of my way unprovoked to look up country music. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of like what we think that we're passionate about is shaped by our environment. And so you'll like notice like there's like entire schools where the kids like for some reason really care about one issue because it's like part of the school culture, but it may not actually be something that you really, really care about yourself if you're outside that environment, right? So there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that you really care about an issue, you're really passionate about something. And a lot of that just has to involve with trying out a bunch of different things, trying to contribute to a bunch of different kinds of communities. So you really start to figure out where do you fit into this whole picture.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
So I think my U-shaped hole is to help inspire people to overcome their obstacles, become better versions of themselves, and become confident. Can
Love
you
it.
tell me a few fears or insecurities you have and how you overcame them?
What insecurities did I not have? Honestly, I've overcome, or I'm overcoming, probably like most of the things that I was afraid of when I was young. But like I felt unattractive. I felt like a terrible public speaker. I felt not very smart. I felt unathletic. I felt like purposeless. I felt like a bad boyfriend. I felt like a bad son. I felt like, like I had to try harder than other people in school. There's all sorts of things that I was afraid of, and part of how I overcame some of those things were I wrote them down. There was kind of like so some of those things I was able to kind of overcome a lot of the trauma of having those insecurities, writing them down, being like, okay, what's true? What's actually true? Mm-hmm. And like, am I doing everything I can to make them less true? And if that's the case, I have nothing to like be anxious about, right? Because I'm doing everything I can.
Right.
Often people have good reasons to be insecure, right? Because like if you're insecure about your body image, for example, and you're not actually working out and not dieting in the way that you can, like the insecurity is almost like your body and your mind saying like you can do better. It's like you can do better, Colton. You can do better, Gary.
Right.
Yeah, I was saying about insecurities. A lot of what you do is, you need to write them down. You actually need to like not avoid them. Be like, okay, I am insecure about this thing. Have I done everything that I can do to deal with it? And if you are, there's really not much to be insecure about, because you can't really change it beyond what you're already doing. And I think your body and mind will know that, right? When it's like, I think a lot of what insecurities are you know you need to do something, and it's like nagging at you to like actually do it.
It's getting over that hurdle to actually do something to change.
Exactly. I think anxiety, insecurities, a lot of it is your evolutionary telling you to do what you know you need to do. And it's often like it's kind of hard to do it, but once you overcome it, you also feel really good. And that's your body rewarding you, your mind rewarding you for actually overcoming that hurdle, like you said.
Great, thank you. So I want to move in to talk more about Civics Unplugged. What you all are doing there is very inspiring. All the Gen Zers are definitely making a positive impact in the world. And I think that society in general, some adults don't give that much credit to younger people. Well, in reality, their imaginations and ideas are outstanding and can really make a difference. So can you share a few projects that have already made a difference in society?
So one project, number one, I completely agree. And number two, some projects include, Civics Unplugged itself is in large part run by Gen Z. We have a couple of our founding fellows from our first that are working full-time in New York with us.
Wow.
Yeah, like we really believe in what we're teaching, and we really believe in the young people that we're investing in, and then we hire them, right? That's like, isn't that like an ultimate proof that you actually believe in what you're teaching?
Exactly.
Yeah,
for sure.
So that's number one. That's one example. It's just like actual Civics Unplugged, and another one is I have like another founding fellow and a mentee of mine. She is launching like a multi-million-dollar fellowship where like each person gets like $20,000 for participating in it, and they get to work on a project that they really care about that may change the world. And she tells me that she wouldn't have been able to do this without the support of me and Civics Unplugged, and that's really cool.
That's inspiring. And I have so much gratitude for what you're doing and what your community is doing as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I've researched a little bit about what you're doing with the Dream. and how you think crypto and Web 3.0 will impact the world. Can you share some more information about that?
Yeah, so we are all about civic innovation at Civics Unplugged, like trying to develop a different kind of leader that's able to drive a kind of a type of change that lasts and leads in a unifying way, constructive way that really grapples with the complexities of the real world and all that. And, a civic innovator needs a lot of different tools to make a difference in the world. And you think about, criminal justice and climate change and education and all these different fields and issues. It's not like people have not wanted to change them. So much of the hurdle tends to be technology, right? When new technologies get introduced, whether that's AI or blockchain, those are the two big ones for this emerging age. These emerging technologies enable new possibilities for how society is structured and how problems are solved. And if we're not educating young people, especially ones that come in from a civics and social impact first mindset, and not just engineering mindsets, we're going to end up with tech that doesn't serve the people. And we're going to end up with solutions that don't actually factor in the collective wisdom of all this diversity that we have, all this imagination that we have from young people, all that. And so the name Dream DAO is a very strategic one because it's a great name, but it's truly about what is the future of our dreams, and how do we leverage technology to build that. And it actually took me a while to fully believe it, but I think that Web3 is critical to in this make or break decade where it's about freedom or authoritarianism, and not just freedom but flourishing and authoritarianism and oppression. There's a stark difference, and I believe that thoughtful application of blockchain and AI in the service of regenerating humanity and the world is everything. This is the name of the game. And if we're not training young people in learning these revolutionary technologies, again, especially socially impactful kids, we're missing a once in a century opportunity, and we're also going to not solve these problems.
For someone that doesn't know much about blockchain or Web 3.0, can you just give a brief overview?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to look at it. One way to look at blockchain is it's a globally distributed ledger. It's like a record of a state of things, right? It's like a big accounting book, who has what and what happened in this network, right? It's just a big chunk of data that everyone is validating that this data is what it is, right? So that no centralized corrupt force can be if evil Colton, an evil version of Colton is oh, I wanna say that I have $1 billion even though I didn't earn that. You can't do that with blockchain, or at least a real decentralized blockchain. And so why is it relevant? Because it's very hard to coordinate people across the globe to agree on things and trust each other if there's not a system that you can trust instead of all those people that you don't know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so this is one giant coordination system that allows for all sorts of things to happen, right? I was just talking on the phone with someone that's trying to create a blockchain-powered organization that allows for 100 different organizations to coordinate to save the Amazon rainforest. And I think this is a little bit out of the scope of this call, but what you just got to know is that I believe that it's possible, that you can now do that thanks to blockchain and cryptocurrency. You can imagine that multi-hundred organization, multi-thousand person or like organization that's trying to save the Amazon rainforest, they have their own like sort of Amazon rainforest saving coin, right? Because you're creating this like purpose-based microeconomy that's like helping each other, and a lot of it's out like above my expertise, but I really believe that this is possible. I really believe that, you know, Web3 is so much more than scams and dog coins and whatever you read in the news. So thanks for asking that.
What led you to ultimately believe in Web 3.0?
Well, I had not really touched it besides like investing a little bit of money on Coinbase years ago. I had not really touched it until last summer when I met some people that were actually trying to use it for good in the world. And I was like, wait, is that even possible? And I just saw like, I'm a big community guy. Like Civics Unplugged is all about coordinating kids and transforming their lives and helping them transform the world. And you know, DreamDAO is like a big experiment in showing how blockchain can support that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the inspiration for DreamDAO came from seeing other experiments in global communities that were able to be self-sustaining because of the way that they were using blockchain.
How can like someone get involved in DreamDAO? Do they have to be a part of Civics Unplugged?
So as a young person, that's the best route to get in. There's limited slots in terms of being a member. It's a pretty tight-knit community, and so I think the best way to be involved in DreamDAO is to be a Civics Unplugged Civic Innovators Fellow, which means part of this fellowship that runs twice a year with about 500 kids across like 40-plus countries each time. And so it's like 1,000 kids a year. But for any sort of adult, you have the opportunity to donate to either Civics Unplugged or DreamDAO. And at DreamDAO, we actually have like NFT. We use NFTs as a way to connote membership.
Okay.
And you can actually go to dreamdao.xyz to figure out how to buy a membership token on OpenSea.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's very impactful that your community involves that many countries.
I think so, especially given, I mean, I have kids in Russia, right? I have kids, you know, we're recording this when Putin just invaded Ukraine, and we're probably going to have some kind of discussion about it as a community. And how many communities can do that? Actually have kids in Russia that are affected by this to talk about what's happening. It's pretty remarkable, really. Sometimes I just get so used to it that I forget how special that is.
Yeah, for sure. So, one last question. I know habits are crucial to success. Are there any habits that you have developed that helped you get where you are today?
Yeah, so many, but I want to touch on, I guess, a category of habits. It's reviewing, it's reflection. It's reflection. And every day I do a daily reflection. Like, how did the day go? What happened? What habits actually did I do? And then on a weekly level, I do a weekly reflection where I talk about, did I achieve my goals from last week? What are my new goals? What did I learn? Who did I meet? All these things. I do that for monthly and quarterly and yearly cycles as well. And why I do that is there is so much that goes on in a given week. Often people that are very busy like me are like, oh, I don't have time for reflection. But reflection, I mean, it may be annoying in school when your teachers like reflect on this book, but like that's actually how you remember what happened. Like that's how you remember the most important things that happened, and how do you actually take the lessons from this past week forward. if you're not reflecting, you're just in this chaos of like, oh yeah, checking emails and like sending emails and like doing a half-assed job at everything. You're not going to get very far, and you're not going to get better. So I feel like I'm getting better every single day. I feel like I'm getting better every single day, every single week, every single month. And if I'm not, I'm failing. If I'm not, this process is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. But it is, and it's shown so much. I'm not the person anymore that had all those insecurities, in large part because I worked at those things every single week. You know.
Powerful. Yeah, I'm starting to reflect now and write down my goals again. So I'm going to make sure to keep doing that and keep growing. So are there any last minute thoughts, and where can people find you at?
Yeah, you can find me at GarySheng.com. Gary, S-H-E-N-G. I'm that on Twitter. That you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect with me. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll try to help in whatever way I can with whatever you're up to. If you're civic-minded at all, and you're in high school, anywhere in the world, apply the Civics Unplugged Fellowship. It's kind of crazy. We had kids from countries I didn't even know of.
Wow.
until they came into our program. But I appreciate you, Colton, for doing this. I know it's not easy to work on a project and maintain momentum. So I just really encourage you to keep going. This is great stuff. This is a great talk.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Remember to be grateful, face your fears, and stay blessed.